For well over a century, baseball has been an indelible part of Buffalo heritage. The game itself has remained essentially unchanged, but in every other aspect of Buffalo baseball, there has been change. Generations of people remember different teams, different ballparks, and different players. Join us as we look at the glory days, the heartaches, and the promises for the future. Remembering Buffalo baseball. One man in Buffalo has been involved in Bison's baseball for decades, Dan Carnevale. He was a player, a coach, a scout, manager, general manager. His association with baseball began at an early age on Buffalo's west side.
We had to do something during the summer, and we would come down to the front park. Sometimes we didn't have a ball and a bat, and Eddie O'Grady or Al Guarneri would supply that, and we would play on diamond number 1 at the front park. And then after the game was over, there was a canal in left field. We would go swimming. And we learned 2 things, how to play baseball and how to swim at the same time.
In the major leagues, Babe Ruth was home run king. In Buffalo, it was Ollie Carnegie, who still holds the record for home runs. Dan Carnevale remembers.
In those 40s and 50s, and also in the 30s for Carnegie, Ollie Carnegie probably was an extremely excellent athlete. He came out of Pennsylvania. He didn't sign a baseball contract till he was 29 years of age. He had worked in the coal mines in Pennsylvania, and when things got bad in the coal mines, and he needed a job, he went back to playing baseball. Came to Buffalo and played for many, many years. Broke all kinds of home run records. 5'7", 155 pounds. But he was as strong as a bull and twice as tough. Because I remember he would grab my cheek when I'd come in the clubhouse, and he would pull on it. I thought he was going to pull my cheek off. He had a habit of doing that all the time.
My father, he liked Buffalo because it was where he worked. He loved baseball, and that's where he played, was in Buffalo. He used to look forward to spring training and coming back to see his old friends and everything. And then finally, in about 1938, we moved here to Buffalo. That's when he hit the 45 home runs. And then I think he played for another couple of years with the Bisons. And I think he went with Jamestown. He played with Lockport. Then he came back to Buffalo as a coach player. And he did that for a couple of years. And if I'm not mistaken, he did some scouting for the Bisons.
The strange part about Carnegie, and the sad part, is the fact that he didn't start his professional career until 1931. And the thought is that what if he had started at 20 or 21? What might his record have been? Absolutely fabulous the way it was, but it could have been much better. And another sad part about Carnegie's career is that he never played in a single major league game. His entire career was in the minor leagues. And he played up till he was 45 years old. And he batted over 300 in 1945.
His legs started to give out, his arms, his wrists. So he called it quits. And after that, he sold cars. He worked for Republic Steel as a guard. He retired from the city of Buffalo. You know, to a lot of people, he was a star. But to me, he was just my dad.
World War II ended, and it was the best of times for Buffalo. There was peace, prosperity, and the boys were home. And even the baseball players came back from the war. You know, during the war years, they had people like Ollie Carnegie, who was in his 40s, and they still had to play because so many of the other players were in the service. Carnegie left a great legacy in Buffalo, the home run king of Buffalo, one of the great home run hitters in minor league baseball. But it was time to move on, and that's what Buffalo did, not only as a community, but also in terms of baseball.
And after Carnegie retired, there were some other great left fielders that came along, all good hitters, rather slow of foot, but they could hit the ball. For example, his immediate successor was a fellow by the name of Eddie, who had the unusual nickname of Shovels, Kobeski, who hit a lot of home runs, later became quite a successful minor league manager. And following Kobeski was Frank Carswell, who was one of the great right-handed hitters in Buffalo baseball history and is in our Buffalo Baseball Hall of Fame. And following him was Coker Triplett, who hit over 300 for 5 consecutive seasons with the Bison, also in the Buffalo Baseball Hall of Fame. So there's been a great tradition of left fielders over the years in Buffalo baseball history.
There were those who believed no other player would ever match Ollie Carnegie in stature. But Buffalo baseball fans soon saw the arrival of another legend. His name was Luke Easter.
One of the thrills that I had in my whole career was the presentation of Luke Easter to the Bisons. When John Stiglmeyer was here, we were able to acquire Luke Easter from the Charleston, West Virginia Ball Club because they were going to go out of business. And Luke Easter probably did more for Buffalo baseball. He and Ollie Carnegie, in my opinion, did more for Buffalo baseball in those days than anybody could possibly have done. They did it with their bats.
A memorable event at Offerman Stadium, I would say probably the most memorable in all the many years that I watched baseball there, took place on June 14th, 1957. It was Columbus at Buffalo. The pitcher was lefty Bob Kuzaba, and the batter was Luke Easter. Now, one of the things that we often talked about at Offerman Stadium was the huge scoreboard in center field. Nobody had ever hit a ball over the top of it. And we always said, people that I talked to base, nobody will ever do it. But on that particular night, it happened. Luke Easter hit a low inside pitch. It arched high in the air. The man who was sitting next to me, my longtime friend, Bernie Sickerman, said to me, "That's it, Joe." And I knew exactly what he meant because we watched that ball sail over the scoreboard. The first one, only man ever to do it.
He hit it right over the scoreboard, about 550 feet, they figured it to be. It ricocheted off a couple roofs, and it hit in my mother's porch. So she thought, well, atom bomb. It happened to hit her house. And she went running outside in her night clothes, and she saw the ball rolling on the porch. So she took it in the house, and then all of a sudden the photographers started showing up, and here she is in her night clothes and her curlers, and they wanted to take pictures of her, and they told her what happened. So she threw a dress on over her night clothes and took her curlers out of her hair, and they came in and took it, and then I guess she got real excited about it. And then Luke Easter came over and introduced himself, and he wanted the ball for himself, naturally, because that was quite historic for him. And she said no, so he did offer her $100 for it, which 38 years ago was a lot of money, but she said no too. So he autographed it.
He became larger than life, a real hero, and I think Luke was one of those people that rose above race. Race didn't matter with Luke Easter because of his gentle humility and his great baseball talent. Kids idolized him. I was a white kid in South Buffalo. I never thought of Luke Easter's color, but I thought of him hitting those home runs. I remember we'd play on the sandlots or play Little League. There was something called the Luke Easter play. And if you had a ball, you hid the ball. You played first base, you hid the ball, and the runner didn't know it. He'd go off the bag and you'd tag him. And that was called the Luke Easter play. That's the kind of, he was larger than life. He was a myth, Luke Easter. In many ways, I might compare him to Jackie Robinson. Certainly not in terms of personality, because I think Robinson was very combative, very assertive. Luke was just a mild-mannered guy who loved kids, who loved baseball. But he changed Buffalo, and he changed the way this community thought about black people, because Luke became a hero for all people. And I think that's his legacy, and that's why he's such an important figure in Buffalo baseball.
Luke Easter's baseball career in Buffalo ended in 1959. The Bisons, then affiliated with the Philadelphia Phillies, had a hot young prospect on the roster by the name of Frank Herrera, a first baseman, Luke Easter's position. Initially, the Phillies said try Herrera at second base. The Bisons tried, but it did not work. The young Herrera was back on first base, and the club released the veteran Luke Easter.
Now, as it turned out, Herrera took over at first base and became the only man in Buffalo baseball history to win the Triple Crown, leading the league in hitting, in home runs, and RBIs. Meanwhile, Luke's career was far from over. Shortly after he was released by the Bisons, he signed with the Rochester Red Wings, where he played for several more years and became just as much of a cult figure in Rochester as he had been in Buffalo.
In 1979, his baseball career long over, Luke Easter worked as a union steward for a company in Cleveland. On March 29th, while leaving a bank with $40,000 in co-workers' cash payroll checks, he was accosted by two armed men. Refusing to give up the cash, he was fatally shot. And Luke Easter was dead at the age of 63.
I remember the day Luke Easter died. I was at the Buffalo News. I was a sports writer at the time, and it came over the wire that Luke Easter had been shot dead in Cleveland. And I called Bill Veeck, who was the owner of the Cleveland Indians, where Luke had broke in as a major league player. And he said even though those bandits who robbed Luke on a Cleveland street and shot him dead, they took his money, but they could never take Luke Easter's heart, and that his heart and his memory lives on in Buffalo.
The death of Luke Easter touched thousands of fans in Buffalo. One fan was so moved, he wrote a poem.
When I was 17, it was a very good year. 57, and the baseball was great. A fine team led by the great man, the inimitable, the babe of Buffalo. Now, they're measuring a coffin, not a homer. They've pulled the hidden ball trick on the specialist himself. They've killed what should be unkillable, the warm memories of youth. A grim variance on Murderer's Row. Luke, Luke, where is it now, the glory and the dream? Going, going, gone.
In the late 1950s, the Buffalo Bison struggled financially. In danger of folding, an idea was born: community ownership. Politicians supported the concept, and the public was offered stock in the baseball club for $1 a share.
Everybody bought stock. I think it cost either $1 or a few dollars for each share of stock. It was really quite worthless, like Confederate money, but the people believed in the team. They bought this stock, and it got to the point, I think, where the team was short of cash, so they needed balls at the game. So if an opponent or a Buffalo Bison hit a ball into the stands, the people would throw the ball back on the field. They apparently, they felt they would sacrifice taking home a souvenir in order to help the franchise. That was the kind of human spirit, the kind of bond between the community and the people that helped make Buffalo baseball special.
Longtime Buffalo baseball fans remember those early years as the golden era, the late 50s and early 60s. Despite financial troubles, the Bisons managed to field winning teams, which were led by exceptional managers.
And Kirby Farrell probably was he and Phil Cavaretta probably were the two managers that I ever associated with who took losses so badly. They would die with the loss of a ball game. They wouldn't talk to anybody after the game. I can remember Kirby Farrell losing a ball game when I was the vice president of the club. We couldn't get him out of the clubhouse. He was sitting in front of his locker, just keep saying to himself, what did I do to lose this ball game? Come on, Kirby, I said, we gotta go, we gotta close up, we gotta eat, we gotta have dinner, we gotta, finally got him in the shower room. And then if he lost and he ran into you on the street, he wouldn't even talk to you. If he won, the greatest thing that ever happened.
And when they did, in 1957, the Bisons won the International League playoffs with players like Lou Ortiz, Mike Baxis, Walter Craddock, Bill Serena, Ray Noble, Joe Caffey. The 1959 team won the International League title with Art Mahaffey, Pancho Herrera. And in 1961, the Bisons won the Junior World Series with players like Bobby Morgan, Jim Coker, Dick Ricketts, and Ted Savage.
When Joe Caffey was playing right field for us, on the top of the scoreboard was a big sign, Pepsi-Cola sign. Hit this sign, you get $1,000. Joe Caffey hit the sign. So now I call Sam Pastor and Ruby Pastor. They own the Pepsi-Cola company. We called the newspapers. They came with the cameras. Sam Pastor got up. The fire engine came on the field. They raised the ladder all the way up to the sign. Pastor went all the way up the top to make sure the sign was dented. Sure enough, he saw it dented, came back down, he says, Caffey gets $1,000.
It's a time I like to call the end of innocence, the period from like 56 to 60, the last 4 seasons, 5 seasons in Offerman Stadium. It's a golden time for Buffalo. They set attendance records in 58 and 59. They draw over 500,000 fans. Don Labruzzo, the general manager, is named the top GM in minor league baseball. His assistant, George D'Addario, does a great job. Kirby Farrell is the manager. Pancho Herrera wins the Triple Crown. Everything seems to be falling into place. But like every time else in Buffalo's baseball history, it's just a setup before the fall, because it always breaks your heart. There's a saying about baseball, the game will always break your heart, and that's especially true in Buffalo, because in 1960, after all those attendance records, it's the last year they moved to War Memorial, and things will never be the same once the Bisons leave Offerman Stadium. It's the end of the 50s, it's the end of a decade, and it's the end of a baseball era in Buffalo.
Dan Carnevale, a major player on and off the field, often referred to as Buffalo Dan. He represents the many who have fond memories of the city and its baseball during the Golden Era. It was the middle of the 19th century when baseball first appeared in Buffalo. The leading authority on those early years is Buffalo's baseball historian, Joe Overfield.
The first regularly organized uniform team was the Niagaras, which was formed in 1857. They were strictly an amateur team made up of young businessmen, lawyers, bankers, insurance people, played baseball strictly for recreation. The Niagaras evolved over the years into one of the outstanding amateur teams in the country. And up to the time of their demise in about 1872, they played teams from all over the country, as far west as St. Louis, as far east as New York and Boston. They once scored 209 runs in one game.
The Niagaras played their games in an old wooden ballpark on Niagara Street on Buffalo's west side. The most notable player on the team was John Montgomery Ward, who came to play at the age of 17. In the late 1870s, Buffalo joined the International Association. It was the introduction of professional baseball to the city. A new stadium was built and used until 1884, when another new ballpark was constructed on the corner of Richmond and Summer Streets, Olympic Park. Buffalo had its share of great players in that era, including pitcher Jim Galvin, who in 1878 won an amazing total of 72 games.
But there was another famous player who played at that ballpark who deserves some mention, and that is Frank Grant, who was reputed to be the greatest black player of the last century. When he was signed by the Bisons, they were a little afraid of what the reaction would be, so they referred to him as a Spaniard. But this subterfuge did not last long. People soon realized he was a full-blooded American Negro. Now, he had very few problems in Buffalo that we know of, although when the Bisons played in other cities, there were racial slurs delivered to him not only by opposing players, but by fans from the stands.
They played baseball at Olympic Park at Richmond and Summer from 1884 to 1888. After that 1888 season, the stands at Richmond and Summer were demolished and shipped by wagon to Michigan and Ferry, where a new Olympic Park was built.
Now, this was to be the site of baseball for 72 consecutive years. On this same diamond, later became Buffalo Baseball Park, later became Offerman Stadium, with which we were all very familiar. But so many notable players played at that Michigan and Ferry site. One of the early ones was Connie Mack, the famous manager who played with the 1889 Buffalo Club.
Connie Mack, inducted into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, had brief ties to Buffalo as a player in his early career, but then went on to fame as a manager in Philadelphia.
Jimmy Collins, like Sal Magley, who came quite a few years later, were both born in Niagara Falls. Magley remained in Niagara Falls, but Collins moved to Buffalo at an early age and lived here all of his life right up to the time of his death. But Collins was signed by the Buffalo Bisons in the mid-1890s, played 2 years here and was sold to Boston, became the most famous third baseman of his era, and is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown. And he's considered to be I think Connie Mack, when he picked an all-star team of the players that he'd watched in his long career, he picked Jimmy Collins as his third baseman.
More than a few famous managers worked in Buffalo. At the turn of the century, George Stallings was the Buffalo skipper. Stallings was aggressive and innovative.
George Stallings was a very interesting man who won 2 pennants and 2 junior world championships while he managed here. He was a cultured Southern gentleman off the field, but on the field he was a firebrand. His vocabulary matched any mule spinner that was ever born. And he did some crazy things on the baseball field. In a game played in 1905 at Baltimore, he put a midget into pinch hit by the name of Jerry Sullivan. The infield came in close when Sullivan came to bat, but he poked a little pop fly over the third baseman's head for a single. So his lifetime average as a Bison was 1,000.
Another Hall of Fame manager played in Buffalo as a young man, and while his remarkable career was with the New York Yankees, Buffalo was his home. Joe McCarthy.
Joe McCarthy played in Buffalo in 1914 and 1915. He hit .266 both seasons. He met his future wife in Buffalo and settled here for the rest of his life. But Joe McCarthy really is famous, especially in baseball, and he's in the Hall of Fame for his managerial talents with the New York Yankees. McCarthy managed the 3 greatest Yankees of all time: Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth, and Lou Gehrig. McCarthy couldn't get along with Ruth. They detested each other. He loved Lou Gehrig.
With the help of Joe McCarthy, Lou Gehrig became a beloved star to many fans. Yankee Stadium was packed on the day Gehrig retired from baseball. Joe McCarthy was there to lend his support. When Gehrig was too emotional to speak, it was McCarthy who gently brought him to the microphone to bid his farewell to the fans.
For the past 2 weeks, you've been reading about a bad rag. Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
He loved Lou Gehrig, and Joe DiMaggio considered Joe McCarthy a father figure. DiMaggio broke in the major leagues under Joe McCarthy, and to this day respects him, I think, as the greatest manager in baseball history. I once interviewed Joe DiMaggio, and he told me that to my face, that he said that without Joe McCarthy, he doesn't think he would have ever had the career he had. But Joe McCarthy guided him as a young man and certainly helped him develop into probably the greatest all-around baseball player of all time.
Ralph Hubble is the Dean of Buffalo Sportscasting, and through the years, Ralph and Joe McCarthy became the closest of friends.
He was just a remarkable man and a great manager because he knew what a ball player could do. For example, Joe DiMaggio came to him as a right fielder and never played right field for the Yankees, only center field, because Joe knew offhand, right away, that's where he belonged. And third baseman came in and never played third base. He always played shortstop because Joe knew right off the bat where he was the most adaptable. He was a keen, earnest, no-nonsense manager. He won 10 American League championships and 7 World Series. Pretty good record. I'll never forget one year after he'd won another World Series. He only won 7 of them. The city of Olean gave him a big welcome home, Joe, because Joe was from originally someplace near there. So he called me up and he said, I got to get in a parade down in Olean. He said, would you drive me down? I said, sure. So we drove down, and when we got to the city line down there, there was people were waiting, and they opened the door and Joe got out. They took him over to a top-down convertible, and he got in and he sat on the back, and they were just about to start it up, and he looked at the fellow that had put him up there, and he said, "Where's Hubble?" And the fellow said, "He's over at the car." He said, "Get him or we don't start." So I had to come, he brought me over, and I had to sit beside him during the whole parade, waving, and back that time they didn't know me from Adam, but Joe, and they gave him a couple of bottles of scotch. So on the way home, when I dropped him off at his Ellicott Creek, and he said, "You take the scotch, I drink rye." So I took the scotch, and that was another memorable day with Joe McCarthy.
In the long history of Buffalo baseball, some ballparks became just as famous as star players and championship teams. For many fans, no ballpark could match Offerman Stadium.
I have very fond memories of Offerman Stadium, off the field also, under the stands, up in the press box, in the dressing rooms. It was such a very homey place to attend a game. As soon as you walked in that outside gate, and as soon as you came up the concourse underneath the stadium, you could just tell by the sounds and by the odors that you were really truly in a baseball park.
The opening of the baseball season in Buffalo was a very, very large event. It was just something that everybody in the city focused on. And the parade that was had, that started right from the foot of Main Street and went all the way out to the stadium at Michigan and Ferry, was a big thing.
On opening day, I don't think anybody went to school in Buffalo. It was a really, not an official holiday, but it was sort of an understood holiday among the school principals, I imagine. That was the day that traditionally people's grandmother died or was buried, and they took off and went to the ball game.
And then if you caught a ball that came over the fence, whether it be in practice or a real game, you could take that ball to the gate, admissions gate, and they'd just take the ball and they'd let you in for nothing. You could see the game. And that was a real thrill, because Mom and Dad couldn't afford to give me the money to go. And then the neighbors across the street, you could also go and sit on their porch. And you could see the games right from their porch. I said they're friends and their neighbors, they wouldn't charge. But after a while, they started charging the other people, you know, that came. So I says, it was a thrill.
But many players would say they would love to play in Buffalo because it had such a great field. The infield was so soft, and when a baseball was hit on it, players wouldn't have to worry about a stone, the baseball hitting a stone and committing an error. It was just a great place to play baseball.
Offerman Stadium was a great place to watch baseball. Attendance figures were always good, but the biggest crowds would turn out when Buffalo was playing against a team from a neighboring city.
Buffalo had rivalries in those days with Toronto and Rochester, and it wasn't unusual to see buses filled with fans coming from Rochester to see games at Offerman Stadium and vice versa, fans going to Silver Stadium in Rochester, going from Buffalo to Rochester. There was something quaint about it. It's not like today's big major league rivalries, say in football, Buffalo and Miami. This was a little different. It was more like one neighborhood block going against another neighborhood block.
And another great rivalry that went on for many years in the International League was Buffalo and Toronto. Now, I can remember many times driving up to Toronto to watch ball games in their old ballpark on the lakefront. And that was a rivalry that persisted until many years. In the 1950s, there was a player in the International League by the name of Rocky Nelson who played for both Montreal and Toronto. He was, in my view, the best all-around minor league player I ever saw. He could hit, he could run, he could field his position at first base with the best of them. And he was a fearless competitor. Many a time I saw a pitcher knock him down with a beanball, and then on the next pitch he would line the ball off the left field wall. He was that kind of a ball player.
Toronto and Rochester were the teams that, if we beat them, no matter who else beat us, it was a successful season. and especially Toronto, because of the Canadian-American rivalry. And Toronto had some very fine teams, and luckily fine teams when we had fine teams. Same with Rochester. And Rochester worked with St. Louis back in those years when St. Louis was one of the powerhouse major league teams with great stars. But whenever those two teams came, you couldn't find a seat in the place.
It is said, all good things must end. That was true for Offerman Stadium. The team moved to War Memorial Stadium.
There was a great opportunity on the horizon for the Buffalo Bisons. There was going to be a third major league called the Continental League, and Buffalo was going to be a part of this, but we realized we couldn't play in Offerman Stadium. So another one of our directors was bringing Ralph Wilson's football team in here, and this was around 1960. And he also was the deputy mayor. So he talked to Frank Sedita, who was our mayor, and said, look, our Buffalo Baseball Club will move with its new franchise over to War Memorial Stadium, which is bigger, and you can now remodel War Memorial Stadium for both baseball and for Ralph Wilson's new football team. What we had to do, though, was get out of our lease. Well, Frank Sedita, the mayor, came to the rescue once again. He needed a place for his new school, and so they demolished the stadium, put the new school there. Buffalo Bisons moved over to War Memorial Stadium. Before they even did it, the Continental League became just a memory. So there was Buffalo in this great big cavernous stadium, which was not made for baseball, War Memorial Stadium.
Now this was a move that required some great engineering by Vince McNamara, who received the thankless job of laying out a diamond in a field that was not made for baseball. It was a very short right field, a long left and a long left center. But Vince did a marvelous job, and the way he laid out that diamond was so accurately and well done that it was never changed in all the years that the team played there. But War Memorial Stadium proved to be a mixed blessing. There was much more room, larger stands and all the rest of it. But fans did not like to go there. It was a cold, dreary place. Parking was inadequate. The seats were a long way from the diamond, and it lost the homey quality that they were used to at Offerman Stadium. The team dragged on through a lot of losing seasons. They had some good players. Among them was Johnny Bench. He played there for 2 years. But for the most part, it was a failing operation.
At the end of the 1960s, the Buffalo Bisons were in trouble. Attendance was down, and victories were outnumbered by defeats. Fans worried the club might go out of business. Joe Ally, a reporter for the Courier-Express, learned that league officials were meeting to discuss the club's future.
They were meeting all day, and I was walking the hallways, you know, listening behind doors and stuff like that, trying to find out what was going to go on. And finally, late in the, well, early evening, I guess it was, must have been 7, 8 o'clock, they called me into their meeting room and told me that the league had voted Buffalo out, and the ball club was, the franchise was being taken over by the Montreal Expos, who moved the club to a city in Canada. I forget the name of the city. It didn't stay there long. Well, Don Mabruza didn't think the meeting was going to take all day. He hadn't even checked into a room. So after the meeting, we went to my room, and he sat there while I wrote my story. And as I wrote each page, I gave it to Don. He read it, picked up the phone, called our office, and called it in over the phone. And after he had called in about half of the story, I tried to read to dictate a couple pages over the phone myself. It was too tough for me to do. I was really shaken up. It was a big loss. It was a big loss to Don more so than anybody else, because he had put his own money up to finance the team that year. He lost everything. And that was one of the saddest stories that I ever wrote.
There's a certain core of people who never stop believing. I call them the true believers. Vince McNamara, Joe Overfield, and of course Cy Williams. Cy is a guy who grew up in South Buffalo playing ball in the First Ward. And in this period, when there's no baseball, it's these men, particularly somebody like Cy Williams, who was scouting for the Detroit Tigers, who goes to the winter meetings, who talks to all the baseball people on a national level, who never stops boosting Buffalo or keeping the hope alive that baseball can come back here. And it's just a reflection of Cy's life. I think next to his wife, Babe Williams, baseball is the great love of his life. And in fact, he met his wife on a baseball diamond.
Well, I was playing softball on a girls' softball team here in Buffalo. And the diamond, softball diamond, was right near the hardball diamond. And Cy was working out with South Park High School at third base. And I'm playing shortstop, and the ball went through my legs for an error, and it went right over where he was working out. So he picked the ball up, and he handed it to me. He said, "Here you go, sweets." That was it.
I was very fortunate having a wife that cared for baseball. She was very patient with me, and she knew it was my livelihood, and she went along with it, so I was very fortunate there.
It was the 1970s, and for the first time in a century, Buffalo was without professional baseball. But fans saw one of their own, Warren Spahn, inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Spahn learned the game as a youngster in South Buffalo, where he is remembered by Cy Williams.
Warren Spahn, was one of the outstanding ball players of that time. He was younger than I was, but I remember coming home from playing ball one year, seeing him pitch in a municipal league game, and I think he was, at that time, was about 5'10", about 140 pounds, and although I wasn't a scout, I saw what a great arm he had, and I think in this particular ball game, he might have struck out 16 or 17 people, and I don't know how old he was, but he might have been only about 16 years old at that time.
It was here in Delaware Park in 1940, where South Park High School. I played with South Park High School as a first baseman, and we won the Cornell Cup in 1940. And Warren Spahn, my teammate, my good friend, pitched a 6-0 shutout. And I was very fortunate in that game. I hit a home run to right center field in the 6th inning, and we really celebrated.
Warren Spahn is the most prominent Buffalo native to play in the major leagues. But he wasn't the first. In fact, when Spahn first reported to the Boston Braves, he was greeted by another Buffalo native, Sibby Sisti, already wearing a Boston Braves uniform. He was known as the super sub, playing all positions except pitcher and catcher.
Well, in 1942, Warren Spahn came up to the Braves the last month of the season. And then 43, the seasons of 43, 44, and 45, both he and I were in service. And we came out of service and rejoined the Braves in 1946. And so Warren and I played together from 1947 till even when we moved to Milwaukee in 1953, and I was released in 1954, and Warren was still there, and was there many years after I left.
He would average close to 300 innings a season, which today is unheard of with relief pitchers and how they baby their arms. He also had 13 20-game seasons, which is a record. And the record today still stands. He led the league 4 years in strikeouts, 4 consecutive years in strikeouts. And also, he loved to hit. To my knowledge, he holds a record for most home runs ever hit by a pitcher, and that was 35, which is a lot of home runs for a pitcher.
Well, Spahn's the greatest left-handed pitcher in the history of the game. He won 363 games, although he couldn't get along with one of his first managers in Boston, a guy named Casey Stengel. Stengel later managed the Yankees, and Spahn pitched against him in 2 World Series and helped the Milwaukee Braves beat Casey Stengel, something that Spahn truly savored.
In 1948, when the Braves made a great drive for the pennant, National League pennant, there was a saying, "Spahn insane and pray for rain." And they were the two great pitchers, Johnny Sain, he's in the Hall of Fame, and Warren. And they used to say if we could just get a day between the starts, Spahn and Sain, and pray for rain.
In the late 1970s, plans were afoot to bring professional baseball back to Buffalo. The point man on this effort was Jimmy Griffin, Buffalo's mayor. Griffin's love for the game began at an early age in the old First Ward at Lanigan Playground.
I remember when my dad and I, we'd come back from Mass on a Sunday morning, and we didn't have too much room in our backyard, but he'd be catching, and Tommy or I'd be pitching, and sure than anything, we'd break a window in the side of our house and get my mother screaming at us. I had a favorite ball player for the Bisons. His name was Jimmy Oglesby. And Joe Overfield sent me a little note one time that my favorite ball player has the record for most errors in a game. He made 5 errors in one game. but I made a lot of errors myself, so maybe that's why I like the guy.
I remember the press conference and those early days when baseball returned to Buffalo in 1979 with Mayor Griffin and his group of community owners. And it was literally a mayor who had a dream and a goal and a desire to bring professional baseball back to Buffalo.
It was a cold day, and I got a call from Donnie Copois. He got a call from an umpire in the Eastern League, Pete Caleri. And Pete said that Jersey City was moving a franchise because their light towers fell down during the wintertime, and they had to move the franchise. So the next call I got was from Pat McKiernan, the president of the Eastern League, and he says, how about going in the Eastern League next year? I says, fine. He called me up again, he says, how about going in the Eastern League this year? I said, fine. So I didn't know what we were going to do, but about 90 of us threw in $1,000 apiece.
And he had War Memorial Stadium there. It needed a little bit of work. And I remember going out to the stadium, and it was just a drab, old, gray, facility, and, that hadn't really been used in 9 or 10 years. There was some soccer had been there a couple years prior. But he had city crews go in and paint, the box seats that were along the first base boxes, I think yellow, orange, blue, all these different colors to just add some, some life to it.
We had the team from 1979 until 1983, I believe, and that's when Bob Rich came in because they were going to take the franchise out of Buffalo. We owed about $150,000, and Bob Rich gave us $100 for our $1,000, which he didn't have to do, and they took over the franchise.
And that was the beginning, in 1983. Of course, I think we were really lucky that first year, because that also, for many of you who might remember, was the year that Robert Redford came to town with The Natural. I think there are a lot of good memories about the filming of The Natural here in Buffalo. And first of all, they really reached out and involved a lot of locals. People knew, if you weren't in The Natural yourself, either in an extra scene, you know somebody that was, for the most part.
Well, my part in the movie was they took about 3 or 4 shots in the dugout where I was standing there and yelling, and then my actual action was when I yelled time to come out to the mound, and as I was walking out to the mound, I'm indicating to my left arm that I wanted the pitcher to come in to pitch to Redford, who was a left-handed hitter, and my pitcher was a left-handed pitcher. And consequently, I made a bad move because Redford hits a home run and I lose the ball game.
Me and Redford, who played Roy Hobbs, and I was Bobby Savoy, actually made a bat together. It was called the Savoy Special. And toward the end of the movie, it was actually here in Buffalo at the stadium, War Memorial, where he split his bat and actually told me to pick out a winner. And this is where the bat came into play, where he hits the winning home run for the team.
Well, when Robert Redford came to Buffalo, he did more than make a movie. He gave baseball credibility here. It had been kind of a laughingstock, AA baseball in War Memorial Stadium. All of a sudden, the biggest movie star in the world comes to Buffalo to shoot a movie, and War Memorial Stadium became an in-place to be. Instead of just seeing the Earl of Bud or somebody, you could see Robert Redford walking down the aisle. And you saw people turning up at the park you never saw before. It was quite amazing, actually. That was a real turning point in establishing credibility for baseball in Buffalo.
History would again repeat itself. 25 years earlier, Buffalo baseball fans were saddened when the ball club deserted Offerman Stadium. Now, War Memorial Stadium was about to be abandoned. Indeed, fans were excited about the new state-of-the-art ballpark, Pilot Field. But the old facility, the old rock pile, was deserving of a proper farewell.
I will never forget the last game at War Memorial. It was a real bittersweet day for I think for all of us. We were excited about Pilot Field, excited about the move, but like I said, there were so many great memories there that it was saying goodbye on a chapter of Bison baseball that was real special for all of us.
A new chapter in Buffalo baseball begins. Pilot Field. Once again, former Mayor James Griffin takes the lead.
It was a team effort, you know. People give me a lot of credit for it, but if I didn't have the people there helping me, we would never get it done.
We wanted a ballpark that was truly a ballpark, that you could walk in and feel like you belong, the intimacy, the warmth, and have the amenities, really the amenities of a Major League ballpark, the amenities of a modern-day ballpark with the old-time feel. What was the beauty of places like Offerman?
Well, when they were going to come over here after everything got set, Mike Bellani and I were talking one day, and I said to Mike, what are you going to bring over from Old War Memorial to the new Pilot Field to make the people remember the wonderful things that they witnessed over there? He said, what do you got in mind? I said, well, if you remember when Kirby Farrell managed Buffalo and I was putting that infield in over the football field, Kirby Farrell came down with John Stiegelmeyer and said to me, Vinny, I got to have a flagpole in center field. I said, hey, you got two beautiful flagpoles on the foul lines. He said, yes, but I got to know when the wind comes off of Dodge Street and swirls around out in center field, I got to know what my pitcher was doing out there when I come in to take somebody's place. That's why we put the flagpole in. Parks Department people put it in. And when we got it over here, some volunteer friends of mine took it out, took it over to the shop and painted it up. There you see it out there now in right field.
One of the great memories, obviously, is the opening day. Opening day historically is a great day, but this one was the opening day of a brand new stadium. It was just a wonderful event. Everything from the parade to tens of thousands of people just lined up by the gates, and having Governor Cuomo there with Mayor Griffin and Bob Rich, and Ralph Hubble was the MC of that opening. I think it'll go down in history as certainly a red-letter day in Buffalo sports history.
I remember that first game because it was a cold April day, rainy, windy, and I remember after the game seeing Vince McNamara, and he was a little stiff, and he was walking slowly out of the park. And I said, Vince, this was a great day, wasn't it? And he looked at me and he said, baseball is baseball, no matter where you play it, whether it's on the streets of the First Ward or in a beautiful place like this. Baseball is baseball.
At the end of the 1994 season, the Buffalo Bisons threw a party for all the Buffalo area players who at one time or another, on one level or another, played professional baseball. The voice of the Bisons is Pete Weber.
A lot of people don't realize that this area has been quite a fertile area to produce guys who can play and are quite capable of playing professional baseball. The Western New York Professional Baseball Alumni Party, it was scheduled for the last night of the home schedule on August 28th, and it was really a great show to see in the vicinity of 150 people who had come out on the baselines who had actually played at least an inning of one professional baseball game.
And at Pilot Field, the Buffalo Baseball Hall of Fame display is a tribute to many of these players and to those who contributed to this community's heritage and history.
Baseball Hall of Fame, where everybody knows your name, and all the people say you were the best that ever played. It's every player's dream that one day he will be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Special dream of all the greatest players the game ever seen. In the Baseball Hall of Fame, where everybody knows your name, and all the people say you are the best that ever played. Well, it's every player's dream that one day he will be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, among the greats in the Hall of Fame.
When you go to Pilot Field today, it's not that different as when you went to Offerman Stadium in the 1950s. You sit with your neighbor, you have a beer, you eat some popcorn, and you watch a baseball game. It seems a simple thing, but it's the simple things that make life special. And it's that magic that happens on a summer night in Buffalo when you can look out at that field and watching the game that brings back memories and makes you feel like a kid again.
This is our first son, so we got season tickets for him this year. So we want to get him to come every year. So maybe one of these days he'll be on the field, we can be watching him play.
You get to know who the players are at a more personal level, and then when you're following baseball, it means a lot more to you. It's not like you're following the players' strike or you're following a team. You're following real people, and their careers mean something to you in a way that they don't if you just read box scores for major league teams in newspapers. So it's a big difference. It makes a big impression. It made a big impression on me.
Thank you.